Thank you, Alan. I don't really like using microphones, but apparently I have to. Oh, okay. I will try without this. No, I have to do it. Yeah. Thought I was going to get something. So, yeah, very pleased to chat to you guys tonight. There's lots of different things we could talk about, and it's going to be very boring if it's just me talking. So I'm going to invite you to yell out any questions or comments, and you can disagree with me because that makes it more interesting. And probably if I just talk, maybe it'll be 10 minutes, whereas if you guys chip in, we'll have more to do. Okay, so we're the energy project, but perhaps I'll start with me. I was managing energy efficiency programs in the late 90s in Canberra and naively moved back to Adelaide to start a consultancy. I'm now on my second business, and a lot of what I've learnt by doing things at home. So I've thrown in some slides about what I've done at home, and we can talk about that because it might be more interesting. But the first bit will be more about the work we do in the energy project. But firstly, the good news is I don't have anything to sell you. We don't work with individual households. We just do work for sort of organisations, a lot of government and some corporates. Recently, my two fellow business partners and I spent a week together and really brought it back into focus, like, why do I bother turning up at work? I don't really need to anymore. And probably the simple answer is the graph of carbon dioxide emissions, which I'm sure you've all seen hundreds of times. We're in serious trouble, and so the mission of the business is to reduce greenhouse emissions. We've also now got to focus on adapting to a changed climate. And we also do some work around vulnerable consumers and how can we help those who are worst off. This is the team, so there's 10 of us floating around trying to do useful things when we can make it into the office. And yeah, we do have a lot of fun. I'm sorry you can't read the bits, but that's probably good. You can always look at our website. And no one's asked any questions or had any comments yet, so who's got a solar power system in the audience? So about 3/4, that's about what I expect. And what about an electric vehicle? I know I've got one taker. Yeah, we've got quite a few. Yeah, cool. So I came tonight in my Volt, which I'm still enjoying 6-7 years on. All right, so that's all the promotional side. I've done the big sales pitch for the business. So now we can talk about real stuff. The first is not a project. It's just our sort of research into what issues are we facing in the South Australian energy market. Okay, so I'm not sure how easy this is to see, and I can only point at one screen at once, which is slightly challenging, so I'll go over here. This is a graph from SA Power Networks, I'll talk about in a minute, showing where we're sort of heading towards, which is basically an evening or late afternoon peak where we're drawing the most power, and we're obviously trying to reduce that peak demand. And 10 years ago, we were really worried about air conditioning in the middle of the day, but the massive amount of solar that is being installed means we're heading towards a solar trough. So we're actually more at the moment about minimum demand from a network perspective than we are about maximum demand. So what that means is at a certain point in the day in South Australia, we're using less energy than we're producing. And that's because of this amazing solar power success story. So SAPN, or SA Power Networks, manage the poles and wires in South Australia, make sure we can get reliable electricity. They do grid connections. Oh, oops. Didn't like that one. They can be quite difficult to work with, but they also do some good work. And one thing they've done is released their new network tariffs. And again, I'm sorry, this is very hard to read, and I'll go over to this one this time. The bit you can't read up here is they'll charge a network tariff of about 20 cents per kilowatt hour. A network tariff is about half your cost you pay on your bill, typically. And then you'll have an off-peak, which is overnight, so we're pretty used to a cheaper off-peak in our tariff structure. But then there's this solar sponge here, which means they're going to be selling power from a network perspective at 4 cents per kilowatt hour instead of 20 cents per kilowatt hour. So I think the big shift we're about to see in South Australia is we're going to have to find ways to use energy in the middle of the day. And so how can we do that? Someone got an idea? Well, we got one here.
Well, the hydrogen, using the excess of hydrogen cells.
So hydrogen fuel cells is one option. I don't think we'll do much domestically in that regard. Yep, so switching over the old off-peak boost electric water heaters to the middle of the day is a big opportunity, but it's not as big as we thought it was. Firstly, they're pretty poorly controlled, so they're coming on all over the place because it's old control systems, and the amount of solar we install each year just dwarfs the amount we can switch of hot water across, but that is a good part of it. Any others? Yeah, electric vehicles are a really big one, and one of the biggest problems I foresee there is we're going to need to make it really cheap because it is such an easy thing to drive home and plug in. It charges slowly overnight and you're ready the next day. So there's going to be some compromises to make that work, but I see that as one of the big options. Yes, turn on your air conditioning. So one option we have is to, say, pre-cool our house in summer. We're going to be at work, perhaps, we come home, it's cool. The major problem we have there is our houses are like dog's breakfast, let us leak. And so you can push as much coolth into your house as you want and it's still going to heat up quickly. But that is a reasonable option, and lots of people are doing that. They have excess solar and they're pushing their aircon, so it's an option.
Put it in hot water.
Yes, hot water is an option. There are some tricky bits to that, but certainly possible. Our main concern from how will this all play out is that it's going to be really hard to soak up the amount of excess solar that is going to be churning into the market every year, and the obvious other one is batteries. And so, yeah, so we need big batteries and we need... Yeah, so that's probably where I think the big shift will come into the Australian market, and we are just through circumstance a leader in that area, so it's quite fun to be involved in. Yeah, so I think the only thing I've missed from this side is the business case for solar is likely to deteriorate a bit, so feed-in tariffs are likely to drop. Going to have to find ways to soak that up, and they'll probably start curtailing solar output. So I'd be interested to see that as well. All right, now that's the most technical part of the presentation. I'll talk about a couple of case studies now, unless anyone's got any questions. Yeah.
On the technical side, why is it, as a non-electrical engineer, why is it that it's harder to push energy back into the grid than it is to draw it out? What are the limitations? Why are the limitations?
Yes, good questions. Yeah, really, it's not so much that it's more difficult to export, it's more that to maintain our generation, to have a stable grid, we need a certain amount of demand, and if we're pushing so much back in, we just end up, it's unstable, and that's when they'll start to curtail. So it's not physics, it's really network management. Yeah, it's not a very good explanation. I believe it is, and that is outside of my core expertise. Some of the other guys know that, but it's really, I think we're hitting about 400 megawatts of minimum demand, and that's starting to worry people. And if we install another 400 megawatts of solar next year, then we're down to zero. Something has to give. Yeah, big batteries are a great solution. So how fast can they be deployed, and what are the economics, and what will happen? Yeah, absolutely. So I think so probably for my mind, a bit of hot water. Love to see EVs being part of the solution, and they're going to come regardless of that problem. So, and then big batteries would probably be my three. Yeah.
What about the new interconnector to New South Wales that's being talked about?
Yes, so controversially, Andrew from our team argued against the interconnector. Now, it will help, and the reason to argue against it would be that if you're going to spend that many millions of dollars on an interconnector, what could you do with localised big batteries and strengthening the grid? Yeah.
The time shifting is not enough, 1 hour. 1 hour time shifting is not really enough, is it? If you had a bit more than that, you could sort of...
Yeah, you're looking at about...
Demand was both ways, but
This, no, it doesn't show it. There's about a 4 or 5 hour window that we're playing with, shifting the solar out, and that's reflected in SA Power Network's tariffs. So,
like the east coast of Australia and us is...
I think once you get enough diversity, you can make it work. The other problem will be that while we're at the forefront, New South Wales, Queensland are banging in solar at an incredible rate too. So there's some interesting arguments there about how that works. All right. Okay, so first case study, a small organisation, East Waste. They do the rubbish and waste for half a dozen local councils. This is just giving you a feel for how we work, I guess. First, we're engaged to do an energy review of their depot, look at how much electricity they're using, analyse their interval data, and find out what their options were. After that, we did a feasibility study for an electric truck, and it's pretty exciting. They had their first electric truck delivered a month or two ago now. So a fully electric rubbish truck doing rubbish pickups.
Can you identify it? Is it obvious?
Yeah, it's not very clear on there, but yes, you can. So you could hunt around for it. And the beauty about the end use is if you look at a diesel rubbish truck, how it works, they floor it and they travel about 20 metres and then they brake and then they floor it. So with fully regenerative braking, you're getting a great outcome. Probably comes back to that mention of hydrogen earlier. I don't see any role for hydrogen in the domestic economy because you can do it all with electric vehicles. Yeah. So other small things, less exciting, we've organised with them a solar power system for their depot and a lighting upgrade as well. So they'll be bringing down their energy costs substantially.
So how would they be charging their trucks?
Yeah. So they will do an overnight charge, not very fast, and then they've got another decision point, which is when they want to convert the next 20 trucks over. Then it starts to get more interesting and yet to look into in detail. Yeah.
How big is the battery bank?
It's pretty small and smaller than it should be. About, from memory, 300 kilowatt hours. Yeah. And the range is not as good as it should be. I reckon a bigger battery and yeah, enough for a smaller day's run. Yeah.
So what's the distance that they're not driving out to
Oh, well, that varies a lot.
dump, or they just go to a transfer station or something like that?
They do a transfer station out at Wingfield, so it's the first advantage. And they've got lots of runs. They do Prospect, which is pretty good, but they also do parts of Port Adelaide Enfield from memory, and it gets up. So as soon as you get on highways and you get up into the hills, you are starting to struggle. But we're talking about the first rendition of technology, and I think won't take long. All right, so that's that one. So this is obviously a much bigger customer, Adelaide Airport. Again, starting with an energy review. In this case, there's about 13 different metering points on the site or main feeds, and we're looking at where could they deploy solar across the whole of Adelaide Airport, where does it make sense. They've also got embedded networks, how do they manage those. We've some years ago now organised the 1.1 megawatt system on their car park. We've just done a detailed design for a major lighting upgrade of the whole of Terminal 1 and the car park. They haven't done the work yet, but that's under consideration. We did a couple of smaller projects, putting 4 EV charge stations in the car park and some energy efficiency and solar out at Parafield. So that's like just an example of a bigger client and the sorts of things you're trying to do. Yeah. There's a small one on the terminal. It is. Yeah, so the solar is, as far as I know, still working, but I'm going to throw a number out and say it's about 100 kilowatts, I can't remember, and we've done another study and they could put 2.4 meg on there, and so it is still there, but it's, you know how things change. Now it's pretty inconsequential, even though it was big at the time. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, do you know if it's still got the water catchment? That was a big thing.
No, sorry, haven't looked at that. I don't know. Yeah. We only see bits and pieces of what they do.
Is that an existing building? I'm not recognising that.
Yeah, it is a funny picture. It's the multi-storey car park. So when you go and pick someone up, you drive immediately to the left of that building, or you pick them up by parking in the multi-storey car park. That's the thing about solar, always on the roof, not always easy to see. Yeah, so the terminal is to the back. Yeah. All right. So I've got one more case study, and then I've got stuff about houses. So if you're starting to fall asleep, you only have to live through one more case study. So some of our work is interstate, and we're engaged by the Aboriginal Housing Office to advise on 900 split system air conditioners and solar power systems for Western New South Wales. Most of the social housing policy is for no air conditioning, and the houses are very poor construction, and they're out in places like Burke, Moree, and it's pretty bad. So that was a real privilege to be involved and see these households get an air conditioner. The first thing we did was a study of the different air conditioning types, because obviously we could do ducted refrigerative, individual split systems for the main living area primarily, or a ducted evaporative, and based on quite a few factors, the split systems came up as the preferable option. Why is that the case? Partly because the evaps can only drop the temperature by 10 degrees, and up there it's 40, 45 plus, it's not enough. And also for maintenance costs and water supply, because often they're feeding very poor quality water in. One of the rationales is that efficient split system, you're drawing about 1 kilowatt of power, and if you've got a 3 kilowatt solar system on your roof, then hopefully you're going to be ahead financially rather than getting into energy poverty. No such funding exists in South Australia for our lower income households.
What's the household stock like?
Oh, appalling. So that's one of the better examples. They're typically fibro, either asbestos, weatherboard, so lightweight, which I think lightweight can be quite good, but you've got to have some mass. They don't have enough mass. They have almost no external shade. They don't have huge windows, which is good, but that's about the only good thing about them. Usually the ceilings are insulated already, the walls may or may not be. Yeah, so not very pleasant. Yeah.
What about batteries?
Yeah, so the economics will change in two ways, and I'm talking about any household at the moment, in that, as I mentioned, feed-in tariffs will decline, and the cost of batteries will decline, and that'll make it more attractive. But at the time of doing this project, 2 years ago, batteries were totally uncost effective, and even now without a subsidy, still not cost effective. Yeah.
Are you putting some sort of timer system to optimise the running during the day with the peak of the solar, so it's sort of automatic or autonomous or something like that?
So the question is there, are we time controlling the air conditioner? Now, we do that in a commercial setting. We'll typically, rather than adjust to the solar, put a, if I can get away with it, a push button timer, very simple, keep it simple, stupid, and it might run for 2 hours and then turn off, because a lot of commercial air conditioning is just running all the time. The problem is when you step into someone's home and you start saying, well, we're going to turn your aircon on and off, it's just very difficult. So we don't have any time control. We do have a temperature control band to stop them from cooling to 16 degrees, for example, and yeah, heating excessively.
And perhaps just letting it run 24 hours a day, so it can't do that, be running for weeks or something?
We haven't controlled that. It's that grapple with how much choice can you take away from a householder. Yeah. It's that difference between institutional setting and a household setting. No, and that's quite deliberate, because the ongoing as well as the installation costs of monitoring is a very expensive insurance policy. Yeah, but it's obviously risky. There will be systems off, many solar systems that are off. Yeah, but from memory, the cost of the monitoring was 15% of the savings every year, and so you're starting to say that's a expensive insurance. Yeah. So the question there was, have we improved the leakiness of the houses? And we've taken a really low-key approach to that, and that is to install external door seals and to patch vents in walls, and we have checked ceiling insulation, but it's usually there, and retrofitted it. The problem is that most of these houses are so bad, you just want to drive a machine through them and destroy them. To turn this house into a passive house is maybe $100,000 job. Just the economics are terrible. So all I feel we can really do is provide them with a form of thermal comfort where the cost is offset from the solar, but it's still a shocker of a house. Yeah. All right, so the next slides I've got are all about my house, just for a bit of fun. But does anyone have any questions? I don't even know how we're going for time. Tell me if I'm rambling on. All right, so you better keep me busy. Yeah.
Commercial basis, why couldn't we be sending a lot of power over to Victoria to say the aluminium smelters are there, plus draw a huge amount of drops in our midday peak? We've got an interconnector that which could do that.
Yeah, so that question again of what is the best way, and I don't feel I've got a definitive answer. As I said, we argued against the interconnector because you could do a lot more locally. As I mentioned, the problem is we are building enormous amounts of solar elsewhere, and so by the time we put in our interconnector, how many years at how many $1 million will it still do a return for us is probably the question. There are limits. Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, we do know that smelter is on our grid as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some towers flew down recently in
Yeah.
Victoria,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
smelter was still connected to South Australia, so we managed to stay afloat.
Yeah. And Marianne, you had a...
I was thinking about this thing that one always used to hear, which was that always remember hydrogen is not an energy source, it is a fuel. So therefore, if we're running solar troughs all the time, is there not some way that we can set up a fuel like hydrogen to be a long-term storage of
You can.
generate electricity or generate
Yeah. So you can use hydrogen. My concern is that compared to a battery, they're just really expensive, both in terms of capital cost and maintenance. So I'll just use a bad example, which is a car. So we can go and buy a really good electric car now, and each year they're improving. Now, if we were to buy a fuel cell car, our cost of fuel would be about 4 times the electric car's running cost. And then you've got to maintain the fuel cell as well. So it just, to me, is a bit of a dead dog. The best case I've heard for hydrogen is used as a thermal fuel in like your smelters, etc., and probably overseas rather than here. But there are different views. I think it's a bit of we're good at digging stuff up and that's what we want to keep doing, and that's sort of part of the dream, but I don't think it'll do much in our domestic economy. So firstly, long distance transport, you've got the Tesla Semi. You can do 600 kilometres. Yeah, I know, but by the time you build your electrolyser and you know, I think it'll be here. Yeah.
For aviation, could it go in with batteries or with hydro or?
Aviation is one of the toughest nuts to crack because, yeah, the fuel side of it, and batteries are heavy. There are a few electric planes, but they're very small, low range at the moment. Maybe hydrogen's good for that. I don't know enough about planes. Do you know, Adrian?
There's one called aviation. It's got, I think, a 1,000 kilowatt-hour battery that carries 9 people. People talk about using electric just to take off. And when you're up there, have small motors. And
Yeah.
you regenerate the electricity using a descending. And Airbus have got a few concepts like that.
Yeah, I read George Monbiot's book Heat, and it's pretty old. It's a great read. And one of his conclusions was actually you could make this whole thing work for decarbonisation, except for air travel. And I think the air travel will continue to develop and we'll get some solutions, but basically we've got to stop jumping on planes at the drop of a hat to watch a footy match or whatever and stick around home a bit more. All right, so...
Just one,
yep.
just continuing on storage. So batteries and gravity pumped hydro are
Yep.
two proven methods. I can't think of anything else that's proven. Can you think of anything else that you regard as promising, such as air pressure, underground, compressed air, gravity, mechanical devices, towing trucks up a hill and letting them come down? There's all sorts of fanciful stuff that gets your bearing in the renew economy.
Yeah, so the question there is, what about other forms of storing this energy? And my personal view is it reminds me a lot of solar power's journey. You know, I was doing energy reviews 20 years ago, and people would say, oh, can you look at solar power? And we'd say, okay, but, we already know it's not going to work. In terms of, I'm talking about economics here, it's not going to have a good payback. And then it all seemed suddenly to me, solar was as cost effective as energy efficiency projects. Now we're starting to talk about batteries, and I'm seeing a very similar sort of cost curve journey. So if I was the entrepreneur developing a new storage mechanism, like compressed air or something, I'd be really nervous, because when you're inventing something, you want to say, I need to meet this price benchmark, but that price benchmark is dropping every year, and I don't think you're going to catch it. So I don't see anyone beating the batteries and pumped hydro. But, I think there's some application for flywheels, but again, I think batteries will trump. Yeah.
Aren't there some CO2 into the plants, houses, when they've actually tried to stimulate plants and algae absorption in CO2?
Hopefully we'll come up some good ways to use carbon dioxide, but I think the main thing as usual is we've just got to stop emitting it, and that's where the economics do stack up. All right, well, yeah.
Aren't we going to run into a waste problem with those oil tanks and batteries?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's always concerns with anything, what's the waste output, but what I'd encourage people to think about is, I've got these two options on either side. Here I've got a solar panel and a battery. Now, they are expensive and they have to dig stuff up and there's waste issues, and that's all very real, but it looks like this. And here I've got a coal-fired power station, and every day I'm shoveling toxic junk into this thing and burning it. Every day. It's a pretty easy win. It's not that the issues aren't real, but they're going to be solvable and they're going to be small scale comparatively. All right, so maybe a change of scene. Oh, you've got another?
Just on burning coal, if you have a kilogram of coal, I've heard somewhere that the actual amount of CO2, the mass of the CO2 that comes off is actually more than the original weight of the coal. Is there something like that?
Yeah, well, you're burning it, and it's not by itself, is it? Because it needs the oxygen from the air, etc. So I don't know the numbers, but that's correct.
It sort of has, so you start off with a kilogram of coal or a tonne of it,
Yeah.
and then you've got this multiplier effect, and it actually produces 2.5 times the mass of the starting thing that goes up.
And we go back to that graph right at the very start of the presentation, and that's why it's going straight up in the air. All right, so maybe a bit more domestic focus. So I moved into my house in 2001, same time we moved back to Adelaide, and I've played with lots of things, mostly quite a long time ago, and made lots of mistakes. So I thought really I could just talk briefly about that, about some of the things we've done, and then if you're interested in hearing more, you can ask me. Gee, hard to see. So it just looks like a white blob, really. Doesn't come out very well. But yeah, we've got some solar and other things. So let's go through them. So I've got 5 kilowatts of solar PV, which was 2 systems, trying to get in each time at the most cost-effective point, to be honest about it. I've got an evacuated tube hot water service, and that's not what I would choose today, but that's what I chose at the time. I've had quite big issues maintenance-wise with sensors and control systems and circulation pumps. I think solar hot water is one of those unsolved things. So now I'd probably choose a sand and heat pump would be my probably choice. We've done secondary double glazing using acrylic sheet throughout our whole house, and it's made a massive difference. We've also obviously insulated and, well, draft proofed, although I probably need to do it again.
What era was your house?
So our house is a 1920s bungalow with an extension by a dyslexic architect owner builder in 85. It is solid, which is good, yeah, double brick. So yeah, the secondary double glazing was the last thing we did on the thermal side, and it made an enormous difference. You know, the R value of a normal window, if you talk insulation, you might have a ceiling and you might put R4 bats in, that's great. Your window's about R.17, so it's like just a bloody big hole, and then if you double glaze it, it's about R.3, so a bit better. Yeah, thank you. So what is secondary double glazing? So rather than knocking out your window completely in the window frame and putting in a new window, which will give you better performance, all we've done is gone to the plastic supplier for $800 for a huge sort of living area and got them to cut sheets of acrylic, and then we've had a recess already in our window and we've just popped it in. Yeah, so the gap in the window is probably 5 centimetres, which is not ideal, but it still works. Yeah, it's just acrylic sheet. Yeah, it's probably 15 years old, or 10, 15, and yeah, go on.
So you get condensation?
So that question is, did we get condensation? And it's funny, I left one window on purpose, and then another one that I forgot, and in the others we put crystals to absorb water, but I haven't had any issues with condensation. I think the trick is doing it on a hot, dry day, and then sealing it, and you...
Did you put like rubber?
No, I siliconed it in, so pretty permanent. Sorry? Okay, someone here used PVC sheet, and good result? I think it might discolour with time. Yeah. And one of the things that's very difficult thermally is if you take a building and you say, I'm going to improve the thermal performance of this building, and you might say, well, I'm going to insulate my ceiling, you might find that the building is actually worse than when you started because you have to do everything. You can't do one part. It's always the weakest link. So you have to insulate and you have to get rid of drafts and you have to deal with your windows. And then if you do those 3 things, you might find that your house is substantially more comfortable. Yeah.
What about thermal expansion of the perspex compared to the glass on the front face?
Hasn't been a problem. Thermal expansion hasn't been a problem. It's still holding in there. Yeah.
I've done that at home, and the perspex flexes quite a bit. So both in both flexes.
So it might be the thickness, or that we've used silicone, which gives it a bit of play. Yeah. I should mention that plastic comes in different thicknesses, and the bigger the window, the thicker you want it. I think we use 6mm, so it's substantial. It's not like a piece of glad wrap or something. What else have we done? Oh, so we've got external shading, shade sails that we put up in summer, and I've painted the roof white, the top roof. We do night purging by opening up the house. It's pretty basic stuff. Although the nights now where it doesn't go below 30 degrees, that really doesn't work. I've got some interesting solar air heaters. One, and they're all homemade, one is just clear roof sheeting and a box, and it collects lots of hot air, and then I pump that into the living room. Yeah, for winter. And another one is a sunroom facing northeast that collects lots of heat, and we pump that into the front of the house, which is colder. So they can be really effective as well. We've got rainwater plumbed into parts of the house. We've got an old grey water system. We've got the toilet with the integrated hand basin. But what I'm noticing is that almost everything I've done is old, like it's all 10 to 15 years old, and it's starting to age, but not too badly, most of it. Yeah, we drive a Volt, I think I mentioned. I did get an early electric bike, probably I was 10 years too early, an Avanti Electra, lead-acid battery, pretty heavy. But there's some pretty cool ones now, so I'm getting tempted, but then I'll be less fit. We're all electric, so we stripped out the gas supply, went to induction cooktop, and yeah, all good. And then we've got less energy related things. We've got a granny flat, which my friends lived in, and now it's my mum, so it is really a granny flat. We've got connected backyards with our neighbours, community, I guess, so we share quite a lot of time with them, and kids run amok. Yeah, some of you would have heard of the Retro Suburbia book by David Holmgren, so yeah, that's that sort of model. And we grow a bit of fruit and veggies, although a bit lazy in the garden these days. So any questions on anything I've discussed about the residential stuff, or anything unrelated to do with residential? See if we can make up an answer. Yep. Yeah, so the comment there is some tests of a white painted roof and a red roof, and 20 degrees difference. Yeah. Yeah. And so some of you would know that there's some special products sold, like Astro paint and fancy stuff. Yeah, titanium. But actually, if you just paint it white, that's the best result. Yeah. So white paint is really effective for blocking heat. However, if you've got really good insulation, both reflective and bats, it won't make much difference. So that's worth giving one. You go. Yeah. Yeah, so the question there is about blinds and what's the embodied energy cost of aluminium blinds. I don't know the answer, but most of these things, again, refer back to my earlier example. On one side, you're feeding a coal-fired power station. On the other side, you've got some gear you're going to hang on to for a while. But I would also add that internal blinds for stopping summer heat are really not very good. You want to put the shading on the outside. Yeah, and you could use canvas instead of aluminium. Or whatever you... Yes, and if you can get the blind away from the window, that helps as well. Yeah. Yeah.
If you're building your house from scratch, and you've got a budget of $1 million or something, for you and your family, what would it look like?
Yeah, so if I was building a house from scratch, what would it look like? Well, I'll just skip forward one slide because I did something really stupid when I swapped business. I left my last business. I had a year off and decided to do a building project, which I would do again if I was going to live in it, but probably not otherwise. So This is an old 1890s cottage, so we've kept all the front and then put on this extension, and I guess this is the sort of thing I'd do, which is it's got a polished concrete slab, it's got big north-facing windows, clerestory windows, because I wanted to get the north. You just have to get that north sun in, is my opinion. And I'm using the slab as the mass rather than the walls. So people spend a lot of time thinking, what am I going to build my walls out of? Am I going to use straw, rammed earth, brick? But I would, again, if I was starting from scratch, I'd do one masonry wall in the middle of the house and a concrete slab, and then I'd do all the rest lightweight and well insulated. That part answers the question. But our building materials are diabolical, like you would probably all know, but brick veneer, you know, you're putting your mass on the outside of the house so it heats up in summer and cools down in winter, and the insulation on the inside. It's a very bad system, and I don't see much point in putting mass in the external walls at all. Just insulate, timber frame, insulation, keep it simple. The other fun thing, just while I'm here, is, and you can't see it very well, but that kitchen is out of someone's house. Someone with too much money in Brighton decided that they would refresh their kitchen and perhaps change the colour of it, and so that's just pick it up and drop it in. It's extraordinary. And the shed down below, it's not part of the house, it probably could be, that's just there because that's fully recycled. So the timber, the iron, obviously the door, yeah, all from salvaged materials, which is nice.
With the old part of the house, how does that perform thermally?
So the old part of the house performs very badly. It's got thick stone walls, and it gets bloody cold in winter and eventually overheats in summer. And so if you wanted to do that really well, you're going to struggle. So part of my thinking is you create a bit of a refuge within your house. Ideally, if you can do it properly, the whole thing is beautiful to live in all the time, but if you can't, you make one big living space comfortable, and then you can put up with the rest. So this still has a split system. It's not a perfect passive house design by a long shot. It has a split system in the living area and ceiling fans in the bedrooms, and that's, I think, a pretty good compromise position. Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the hot water in your house.
Mm-hmm.
I don't quite understand your system.
Yeah, so ours is a form of solar hot water, and it's evacuated tubes. Yeah, yep. And the tip I would have there is we pitched ours at about 60 degrees. So they stand, it feels like they're almost vertical. And the reason is in summer you get too much hot water and your system overboils, and in winter you don't get enough. And so if you put them at about 60 degrees, or as close as you can get, you'll get a much better balance over the year. The flat panel? The evacuated tubes are much more efficient, they're better insulated, and they can get sun from a bigger range of angles. But as I said, I have had quite a few control issues. And unfortunately, you end up with lots of different parts. You've got various pressure limiting valves which can fail. You've got the pump, circulating pump, which can fail, the controller, the temperature sensors, and they're not one integrated unit, they're just all these bits. You get the same problem unless it's a direct coupled one using thermosiphon, which is a big advantage.
I just share a story about solar hut.
Yeah.
My partner and I were living in a house that had an old solar hut system and the gas failed, so it was replaced. And in the kitchen of the house there was a manual override or a manual booster. So when they come to replace an older solar hut, they leave the manual booster, so you get a true sense of how much you free hot water. Because after a few cloudy days, you haven't got much hot water, so you have to turn on the booster. In the modern systems, when they're installed from new, it's all automatic.
Yeah, so I'll just summarise.
My point is that we've got to understand
Yeah.
it actually isn't as efficient as you might think.
Yeah.
But when it's all happening in the background, automatically, electricity's heating the water without you realising it. You think it's free hot water, but it's really not a lot of the time.
So I'll just summarise in case people can't hear and for this dreaded projector thing. It's about solar hot water and how do you operate it really in a way. And so for our social housing work, solar hot water is actually a bit of a disaster because you're rolling it out on an asset management approach. So people aren't researching it themselves and interested necessarily in what they're getting. And they will leave the boost on all year. And then they'll get up in the morning and have a shower using the coal-fired heating overnight. And then, oh sorry, I got that wrong. They'll usually use it at the other end of the day. Which one? No, they use it at the night time and then it heats up with coal-fired power and then the sun comes out and the tank's already full of hot water. So that is the very common scenario. So even the more interested user still rarely knows that if they don't have a manual switch, they can turn it off at the circuit breaker. So, yeah, I just... Yeah. 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 Any other? Yeah.
Yeah, question about thermal mass. You've got concrete floors and bricks and things like that as sort of passive storage built into the design. Have you got any experience of using thermal mass such as phase change materials where you try to store heat or cool, such as a large mass covered in insulation and blowing air through it?
Yeah, so the question there is, what about other forms of thermal storage in houses? So you can have rock piles which you draw air through, you can have phase change materials. I haven't done a lot with them. I did research phase change materials for this job and they were still, for me, prohibitively expensive. And I think it's probably in general overkill. You can put too much mass in and you can, you know, if you've got to have a middle wall, you build it out of mass. I think that would be enough for me. Yeah, but I'm not an architect, not that they understand energy anyway, or passive stuff usually, but no, I don't have enough direct knowledge. Yeah. Yep.
You mentioned alternative to your solar hot water, and didn't quite understand what it was, and I'm considering solar hot water.
Yeah. Yeah, so an alternative to solar hot water is a heat pump, and there's quite a few on the market, and they work exactly like a refrigerator in reverse. They have a compression cycle, and so that typically looks like a hot water cylinder with something stuck on the top. Now, most of those systems are complete garbage. They fail quite early, they're expensive. I've only experienced one that I like, and it's called the Sandon heat pump, and it uses carbon dioxide as a refrigerant, and they're quiet, they're efficient, they work in cold weather, so you could look at that as an option. But they're expensive too, but they're pretty good. Anyone got one? And happy? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'll put one in this house. It's got a Sandon heat pump, and they've got quite a nice little integral controller, so you can set them to run during the solar sort of time of the day.
What are your thoughts on using solar panels directly heating resistance?
Yeah, great question. I've been meaning to do the back of the envelope on an alternative water heating, which is just using more solar panels. Now, years ago, that would have been heresy, you know, really expensive solar panels, you can use them for water heating. And yeah, I reckon that's probably the most cost-effective solution now. Is direct wire to... Yes, I haven't looked into the exact way to configure. Has anyone done that, put the solar power directly to the hot water? It's a good option, I think.
I've just got some regular electric storage.
Yeah. Same. Yeah. Yeah. And how do you feed it in? You generate the power through an inverter?
Just a regular grid-connected solar system and a regular hot water.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, pretty simple.
I've got the regular solar hot water. I put them in 2000 solar, had a 6-year guarantee, but if I change my rod every 5 years, which I've done, it's still going over 3 years old. And I just turn it off all year, except for when I get 4 days in a row with overcast, cold weather in the middle of winter.
So there's a good experience with solar hot water. So there is a bit of variation there. Yeah.
Brand was yours.
Mine was one that went out of business, Hills. Yeah. Good choice. Yeah, the controller's still going, but the circulation pump was pretty garbagey. And the sensors, oh, who knows. Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about the solar, so you said there was a solar system where you're transferring heat, you had two different ones.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Is that like a trombone window?
Yeah, very similar to a trombone window in operation. You're basically trying to catch sun, heat air directly, and then pump it where you want that heat to go. So sometimes it's called a warm air transfer system. So you can go to an air conditioning equipment supplier and order a warm air transfer system, which will be a small fan, some ductwork, and then you just run that ductwork from the hot room to the cold room and have a switch. And you can operate that with a thermostat as well, so that's the way mine works. When it's over, and I can vary this, say it's over 24, it'll pump heat from that sunroom into the back room or from the solar air heater on the roof. It's just a bit about how do you create the environment where you're going to catch that heat that's not going to be a disaster in summer. Yeah, so it's pretty dodgy. I took off the actual roof sheets, so 6 square metres of roof, and I put clear roof sheet in, and then I built a box underneath it, very heavily insulated, and put a fan and some ductwork in. Yeah.
Was that visible on your house then?
Yeah, it's such a bad resolution that I don't think you'll see it. So just while we're on photos, yeah, that's our kitchen, but you can hardly see it. Sorry, I'll... Yeah, so you can see there's 4 panels on this roof and then panels below it. Immediately above those panels, you can't actually see it in this photo, is where I've taken off the roof sheets and plonked this solar air heater. Now you can buy a solar air heater off the shelf, but you know, you're paying a lot for a box that then you screw onto the roof, so there's some downsides to that. Yeah. Yeah, so that's one of the classic questions is, do whirly vents work? And the research I've seen is that not really, or only under very specific circumstances. So what happens, which people don't realise, is the heat hits the iron or the tiles of the roof, and the radiant heat is what's killing it. So you can cool down that air temperature a bit, but it's the radiant heat, which is independent of air temperature, that's passing through and heating up the house. So it's very different if you've got a pitched ceiling. Then you can take air out of your space if you can control it well. Yeah.
There are solar-driven fans, extractors which are put on your roof, and they seem to be considerably more effective than the whirly birds.
Yeah, that'd be a bit more active, but again, I think it's about the structure of the space. I'd rather have something that takes air out of my living room rather than out of my ceiling for comfort benefit. And then you've also got to control it in winter so that it's not working against you.
Well, I think the ones I'm thinking of, I think they're made by a crowd in Victoria. They switch off on a temperature.
Yeah.
Temperature basis,
Yeah.
so in winter time they don't operate.
And-
An electrician I was associated with said, "Oh wow, under this roof this is really fantastic compared to a lot of the
Yeah, well, it'd be good if you're the electrician, but you're not the electrician usually, you're just underneath it. The last thing is, in many of these systems where you've got ductwork, it's good to have dampers that close so the air can't flow the wrong way. And also, last word would be, try and avoid ducted air conditioning systems because they suck a lot of energy. And I think I've probably run out of time. Yeah? Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh.